Fabulous. Okay. Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Patrick Walsh. I am the chair of the Audit Committee. A few housekeeping points before we begin. This meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. By participating, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the fire exit, and the assembly point is located in the car park. Please can officers and guests introduce themselves when they first address the committee? And would everybody please speak into the microphone? Let's proceed. Item 1 is apologies for absence. No apologies for absence have been received. However, it is noted that Sharon Lee, the Chief Executive, and Sophie Green, the Treasury Manager, will be joining us this evening remotely. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Hearing none. Moving on then to item 3, matters arising. Further to the annual health and safety update report considered at the last committee on the 6th of November, a briefing note on library safety has been circulated to committee members. Do members agree that the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 6th of November as an accurate record?
Great.
Excellent. In that case, we shall move along to item 4, the mid-year Treasury Management Review for 24-25. Can I ask Matthew Dawson to introduce this item? And also attending this is Sophie Green, who I believe will be joining us remotely. Over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. So my name's Matt Dawson. I think I've met most of you before, if not on the pension committee side when I did this role prior to taking on the fund. So I actually looked after your treasury through the early part of COVID. So it's nice to read the reports and see some more favourable interest rates being earned. So yeah, as your role of audit committee members, you'll see these reports twice a year, the mid-year report and the outturn report. So this takes your performance starting April 24 to the end of September. So it's a little bit dated by the time we get round to looking at it, but that's just half of the course with these things. I'm just going to pull out the interesting bits of the report as opposed to going through each individually, but I'm happy to take questions where applicable. So under the detailed analysis, the table at point 3 gives you the analysis of where we were at March 24 compared to September 24. So no new borrowing, very small maturity on the PWLB, just under 5 million, which takes your average rate down. That hasn't been refinanced yet. I'll get on to talking about debt levels, but yeah, very small maturity. All PWLB debt, with the exception of the small £1 million bond that you raised on as an aside. Cash invested through operational use of cash and normal operating. You have actually seen your cash balances diminish from circa 160 to circa 115 throughout the first 6 months. It's done a couple of things, but what the main thing is that we will keep a real eye on liquidity. We'll keep a lot of your funds in same-day money market funds, and the time deposits that Sophie does on your behalf, you'll keep that maturity period nice and short. Now that's quite a nice thing to do in these markets, even with the base rate not as high as it was in 22, 23. You're still at a base rate of 4.75. It's still quite a nice market to lend cash in. Over the page on to point 7. So yeah, small bit of repayments. There is a need for you to borrow. You will need to borrow in the near future. In fact, point 10 sort of hints to this before the end of 24. I think now you could say before the end of the financial year. Yeah. Now, it's worth remembering that you are still very much under borrowed as an authority. At point 8, you'll see your capital financing requirement at 450 million, but you've got debt of 211 million. So you are into what we call internally borrowed. So you're in a very good place in terms of financing future debt. So the three most asked questions when borrowing is how long for, how much is it going to cost, and when are we going to do it? What's the cost going to be, and how long for? And actually, the answer to those questions is very much it does depend on when you actually go out and borrow. As things are now, you can get a pretty favourable rate on 5 to 10 year money from the PWLB. You're talking circa 5%. Which, if it sounds expensive, remember that you can actually invest it out until you need it. So the cost of carry, as things are, it's a real thing, but it's 25, 50 basis points. It's still a relatively small cost of carry compared to what we've seen in recent years. We are expecting the base rate to trickle downwards, but very much over the medium to long term. I think with inflation still, at around 3%, we will see this higher for longer. The days of the emergency rates are gone, but as we sit here, your Treasury management advisors are expecting debt levels to rest at about 3.5% over the next 3 years. So, slow trickling down of interest rates. Over the page, this just gives you an analysis. So, closing capital financing requirement, and all that does is it splits it between general fund and HRA. So, most of your debt, about 80% of your debt, is HRA related. In fact, the last time we borrowed for yourselves in very early COVID, that was all HRA borrowing, achieved at historically low levels. So that was good. We just wish we'd have done more of it. But most of your debt is HRA. At 14, all this is showing here really is that as your cash has diminished, we've tried to keep money market funds as topped up as possible without losing that little bit of upside that you can get through locking cash out. At point 16, the average SONIA for the year is 5.25, whereas you've achieved 5.21. That's pretty good. That's a really good result, because your average portfolio duration would have been less than 6 months because of the cash you've got in money market funds, and also that's because you actually had a tranche of local authority deals at over 6%, which would have been falling off through that period. So it's against the SONIA rate, it looks pretty good. Point 18, I always make a point of mentioning authorised limit. So your authorised limit before you'd have to report anything, you could borrow up to 850 million. You wouldn't do it. You'd have no cause to do it, but you could without it being a reported event. And your operational boundary, if everything was fully funded and all of your works were paid for up front, that would be your CFR and that's come down actually over the 6 months to around 740 million. So lots of scope to and lots of room to borrow should you need to. I've got nothing else that I wanted to pick out, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Is there anything that Sophie wishes to add?
That is happy for me. Thank you.
I don't think there's anything that we need to add.
Okay. Fine, I'll give the mics a moment. In that case, we'll move along to questions from members of the committee. Any questions from members of the committee?
I'd be interested to hear a bit more about the borrowing. At what stage did we realise that this would need to be a requirement? And what are the things in particular that we need to be borrowing for?
So we basically, our cash balances have been reducing because we're internally borrowing, as Matt mentioned, which is a perfectly legitimate Treasury decision. What it means is we're borrowing against our cash balances. We're not borrowing externally, so we avoid the interest cost of borrowing externally. We've sort of set a sort of an informal threshold that isn't mentioned in the report, but like a sort of a rough threshold of around about 100 million, at which point we'll go out to borrow more. But you can only borrow long term for capital purpose in local government, so that's like a sort of statutory requirement. So that's the reason. And as Matt said, we're actually significantly under borrow, so we've got the ability to kind of go up to quite significantly above where we are at the moment. As Matt said, the split of the ratio of general fund to HRA is around about 80-20 at the moment. We were planning to go out to borrow more HRA money before the end of the financial year. PWLB rates are around about just over 5%, but we get a sort of a discount off of that PWLB provides called the certainty rate of about 0.6. So we'll be borrowing now around about, if we went out today, we'd be borrowing at around about 4.45%. So not too bad, and something that's been factored into the HRA business plan in terms of affordability. So yeah, does that give you sufficient? Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, James. Councillor Lisa Holman.
Yeah, it relates to that point actually. As a new member of the committee, obviously I've not had this report before. How long have we been under borrowed, I think is the question. So is this a sort of ongoing trend, or is this a recent situation?
So it's not a bad place to be. So we're a local, and it's kind of a standard kind of treasury strategy, if you like. Where a local authority has balances, it will sort of internally borrow against those balances to actually minimise its cost of financing. So this has been something that we've been able to do for a while. It's not always the case, but we're in that position, and where it is, you really try and utilise it as much as you can to minimise that actual cost of financing.
Councillor Florian Chivot-Verdio.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this report. I suppose that this is a public meeting. It is a positive that we're not swarmed by hordes of people here to express their discontent, or worse, people here to speak about the situation that we could be in, which could be a very bad situation, where we seem to all be pretty relaxed, and I think we need to understand why. When you're talking about decisions made, pre-pandemic, that shows true leadership and foresight for a number of years. You can don't hold it against you, you can have foreseen distrust. Who could have? So yes, we wish we had done more of that, but I want us to, first of all, take comfort in the situation that we're in. That's really, really important. We're in a healthy financial situation today, and we actually will be able to move on probably from this item to the next with, peace of mind. But it goes even further. We've had the ability to decrease our borrowing. So we're swimming countercurrent. As a Frenchman, there's terrible things happening with borrowing in France. There is also in this country with the heritage we've been left. We are swimming countercurrent, and that's thanks to people who couldn't be here. I'm thinking about the cabinet member and yourselves. So thank you very much. The question I wanted to ask you is, some of your borrowing, some of the decisions you've had to make was around that economic uncertainty. And I know this new government is planning on introducing a system whereby we'd see multi-year settlements rather than just sort of being told a few hours before Christmas Day how much money we're going to get. Obviously, that hasn't happened for this year, as I understand it. But how do you think this will impact our ability to accurately budget and resort? Yes or no, possibly yes or no, but will it mean that we have to resort to borrowing even less if we have that sort of multi-year certainty?
I think that is primarily on the revenue side that you're talking about there, in terms of our local government funding settlement, and what that will do will give us certainty, or more certainty, for our revenue position over the medium term. And obviously what goes into revenue is the revenue cost of capital, so cost of interest, and also minimum revenue provision for the general fund, not the HRA. And really what that will do is just kind of bolster and kind of strengthen our ability to plan over the medium term for our cost of capital within revenue. So that would be the primary kind of thing that it would give to us in terms of more certainty in that respect.
So whereas we are under-borrowed, which I understand to be a good thing, do you see that if we were to get multi-year settlements, that means that our borrowing could decrease?
So our borrowing really is against our capital programme. So that's quite kind of a separate part of the system, if you like. And so really that is to some extent governed by our ability to finance it, and that's really the way to look at it. So we'll have more clarity on our ability to finance and service our debt, etc. And that would really be it. So it would be a kind of a way of kind of helping us estimate what we can afford within capital with more certainty going forward.
Good, it's good to hear that. And what's the latest development in terms of engagement between DLUC and ourselves?
We are very much waiting. So obviously we are waiting for the local government finance settlement for next year. Should be coming on the 19th of December. So that's when we're expecting to hear what the settlement will say for next year. As you've said, really, we're hoping that will be the last year of this kind of 12-month hamster wheel and finding out, a few days before Christmas what's going to happen in April. And there is obviously quite a bit of lobbying from the sector with DLUC. Functions like the Society of London Treasurers, which is the sort of like the group of finance directors in London boroughs, have regular kind of contact with DLUC and CLG. And really it's about trying to inform and get, as you say, as much certainty for as long as possible, really, in terms of those medium term sort of 3-year settlements. Really, I suppose you could say that government is just getting sort of 25, 26 over the line. So I think really we're primarily focused on that at the moment. But as you say, come sort of, once December's been and gone and we start to look forward, then hopefully we will start to get a bit more certainty sooner in terms of our the sort of revenue settlement going forward.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to those analysis.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other questions from members of the committee? Okay, in that case, we will move along to the recommendation, and there's just one recommendation on this item, and that is, do members agree to note the Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25 mid-year review?
Agreed.
Excellent. In that case, we shall move along to item 5, and so we'll give it a moment. But speaking on this item is going to be Maura Mackey. Over to you, Maura.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'm Maura Mackey, I'm the Head of Internal Audit, and this is our regular progress report. It actually covers the period up to about October. So we managed to finalise some of the work that we'd pretty much completed at the end of the last financial year, which is good, and they were all positive assurance opinions. We've also managed to complete a handful of audits from this year's plan, which was good, and again have been positive assurance opinions. I put in an extra bit of information on a piece of work that we did is sort of in live, which is the election readiness piece. So the idea was that we would audit in real time when you were preparing and undertaking the GLA elections, and then report. And then, of course, the general election was called very soon after that. So we took a break so that the poor team that were dealing with this could get on with their jobs. Picked it up after the general election once they'd had time to breathe, and really look at it, how it's panning out and how well prepared it was, and how it will look in 2026 when you have your borough elections. So it was a very positive piece of work. It was quite interesting to actually work in real time as well, have ongoing discussions with key individuals. You've had challenges, obviously, the very short turnaround time, but it happened, it worked. There are a lot of people involved across the council in it, which is good, and they do pull together. And it has an excellent support, obviously, from the Chief Executive, who keeps in touch with the service on any key concerns. One of the biggest concerns, of course, with the short notice of the general election was, where were you going to do the counting? And you managed to do it in the same place that you did the GLA elections. So everyone was prepared. One of the key things that the sort of the general sector has noticed is that resourcing elections has become a little bit more challenging. I guess people get older, give up, move on, whatever. And of course, the general election, it was very short notice and a lot of people have booked holidays because it's that time of year. But they managed to over-resource it and all the resources were used. So to me, it was a very good example of very good planning and understanding of what the key risks were. So I think you should be quite confident with the future elections. They had some quite young members of the team as well, and now they've been through two. They've learnt a lot, so that's quite good for them. So in addition to that piece of work, which was, as I say, done in real time, we're trying to focus on the follow-up work. So it's quite important to us that when we make a recommendation, somebody actually implements it. We have a little bit of a backlog of follow-up work. We've brought it to the in-house team to follow up all the audits now. It was done partly by contractors. We do it all now. So we've got a few that are a little bit older than we'd like, but we are catching up with them. And the key thing to understand is that we will pursue it until we get a satisfactory response. And we include in the report here in an appendix those where we haven't quite got there yet. But we will continue to progress those until we get to a point. Sometimes recommendations can't be implemented in exactly how we thought, but we look at what they are doing and whether it's appropriate to mitigate any of the risks. So, as I say, we report on there, and that hopefully won't get too big a table. It will gradually reduce. So, just to say, there's a bit of a time delay on that. Otherwise, I think, that's about it. It's to say it's a progress report. There's a lot of work in hand. You can tell from the Appendix 1. The majority of the work is in progress. I know some of them are coming to an end. Quite a few of those that are shown as in progress will be wrapped up and be included in our next report to you, which will be in March. And that was all I was going to say, really. If there's any questions on anything particular, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Maura. Do members have any questions? Councillor Homan.
Question and a comment. I'm assuming when you're saying the ones that are not quite as advanced as we would have liked are the ones in list Appendix 2. Yeah, okay, I thought that was the case. I just wanted to make a comment otherwise, which was about the electoral services, because actually this particular piece of work in terms of voter ID readiness, especially, actually came to Policy and Overview Board on 2 occasions. So not only were they being audited by yourselves, they were also being quite heavily scrutinised by us on Policy and Overview Board. And I think, just have to echo what a fantastic job that they did on those elections, and they were so tight together. And I think, we've got lots of confidence in that going forward for the elections next year. So I'd just like to put that on record here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury, I think in that case, Councillor Morton.
Just on the executive summary, you've got a...
Mike, Councillor Morton.
On the executive summary, you've got a red line against on significant weakness in housing. Can you tell us any more about that? It's page 353. Sorry, yeah, of the executive summary.
Sorry. 3. Yeah, I've got from page 24 is my report.
Which one?
What was the...
Is there a paragraph number?
So I was just looking at the executive summary.
Sorry, this is 110 last month.
This one?
110 last month.
While we wait, is there any other questions from members of the committee?
Yes, but
Councillor Shilford,
I'm happy to.
do you want to continue, Councillor, while we identify the relevant paragraph?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Moira. I think to recognise the hectic pace the hectic year it has been for you and your team. So thank you very much for that. I think you were kind enough to say that we were good to be able to hold the elections, but I understand we also took the lead in the GLA elections. We didn't just take part, we also sort of were so well resourced that we were able to also help our friends at RBKC and Westminster. Is that right?
Yes. Although it was technically led by Westminster, you provided the accommodation for the counting, and because you'd already booked it, and it worked really well. From what I had really good feedback on that.
That's really good, thank you. I wanted to deep dive on parts of the report, especially pages 27 and 28. So in your report, you say to us that there were no specific issues identified following the introduction of voter ID. You'll say that overall there was good preparedness from the council in spite of challenging odds. I wanted to get your feeling of, so obviously voter ID was sort of implemented following the Elections Act. These were the first two elections in which we resorted to presenting voter identification. When you say that there were no issues, is that simply from the point of view of the organisers, or would that take into account feedback received from residents?
So they were very well prepared in that there was a training. Everyone had to undergo training for it, which I did as well. It was very detailed, and everyone who went to the training was, it was explained how they could deal with it. They were very keen to monitor people turning up without identification, but also who then came back. And from the records that I talked through with the head of service, there were not that many that didn't come back. And I'm not aware of any significant problems or, polling stations having issues with individuals who couldn't vote, or people not being able to get a voter authority certificate, I think it was called, beforehand. So, I think the council did a lot to promote what you needed to do to be able to vote, which obviously was quite important for the general election. And we were kind of lucky we had the GLA one just before that, really. So I'm not aware of members of the public specifically, but this is collated from the feedback from the actual organisation.
Thank you for this. And would the final report, when it's available, is that something that would be shared with committee members? Yeah. In full?
I'll obviously go through Sharon first.
Sure. Yeah, it'd be really helpful, I think, if we could review. I'm particularly myself interested in, obviously, the organisation. Again, this is one of those areas where we can just briefly pass on this because that was so well organised. That doesn't take away the fact that we're very thankful to all the teams who made that possible, but I'd really like to deep dive onto whether, as it was the first couple times, whether there were any issues from the point of views of clerks, from the point of views of voters or any other parties. So thank you.
I believe the head of service would have that information that they'd be able to provide to you as well, because they had a lot of debriefs afterwards. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'll pass it through Sharon. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morton, do you want to come back to your point?
I must apologise. I had last month's wrong paragraph.
No worries. In that case, is there any additional questions from members of the committee?
No.
Yes, Councillor. Oh, sorry, not Councillor. Moira.
Promotion. Yeah. I just wanted to mention to you, Chair, and I hope it's okay to do it at this point, but at the annual report, I mentioned the new global internal audit standards. There was quite a lot of writing in there about that. They become operational from April next year, which isn't a massive issue for yourselves, but obviously we'll tell you about them nearer the time again. But one of those things that we ought to be doing, and before we get to April, is we ought to undertake an exercise with the committee which identifies the effectiveness of the audit committee, and that is an expectation of part of the standards that your audit committee can demonstrate its effectiveness. We don't think that would be a particular problem, but what I wanted to raise with you is whether you would be okay if we shared a questionnaire with the members of the committee for you to self-evaluate against, with the view of having a workshop after Christmas. You might get the questionnaire before Christmas, which we can help you go through those and analyse your questionnaires and identify if there's any areas which we could maybe improve on, or areas where we feel we're doing really well on. But what you should do then is report on your effectiveness to full council every year as a committee, and that would be expected in the standards. So we want to try and get ahead of it. So is it okay if
If I can exercise chair's discretion, unless members wish to raise otherwise, I would be agreeable to such a measure.
Thank you. So we will facilitate and help you with that.
Yeah, Councillor Holman.
I'm agreeable. I just wanted to ask a question. You said a report to annual council or full council every year. Is that going to be one of the requirements of the new global audit regime?
So it's good practice for the audit committee to report on the work it's done, and to identify any actions that could help. It's a useful opportunity for you to review your terms of reference, make sure they're still valid and that you're still achieving what you need to achieve, and you're being able to see the reports you want to see to help you achieve them. So again, we can help you with that, but it is good practice to do a report on an annual basis to the full council on the work that you've done, and in that you would also reflect on your effectiveness. So that would be part of that report. As I say, myself and David Hughes, who's the director, he would be more than happy. We've done it before, facilitate the workshop, but it starts off really with you asking yourself, there's a checklist, it's a SIPFA checklist, and you can just go through it and ask yourself the question, do I think, how do I feel on this, and it is quite long, but it's worth doing, because I think it can flag up areas where you may feel we can help you, or other areas where you're very confident. And once we've got the questionnaires, we can then have the workshop to sort of flesh it out, as it were, and that would then feed into your report, which again we can help you with. But yes, it is that you are expected to report on the work that you do. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, so it sounds like a worthwhile exercise, and I do look forward to the questions being shared. Thank you, Moira.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask then, do members agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Fabulous. And then sticking with yourself, Moira, for item number 6, which is going to be our risk management update. And Moira, could you please present?
Thank you, Chair. This is not a very detailed report, as you may have noticed. You're probably used to seeing the risk register. The risk register hasn't changed since the last time you've seen it, although the council is keeping an eye on the number of risks on there, because the external auditors have commented a few times that they think there are too many. But the key thing that's happening at the moment is there's a lot of work going on, talking to the departments and the senior leadership team on updating the risk strategy for the council, because it is quite dated. I think it was written in 2019, so before COVID. A lot of things have changed since then. So the key work that's been going on at the moment is obviously keeping an eye on the risk register, and the SRT assurance regularly reviews different departments' registers to see where they are, if there's anything that needs to be flagged up and needs to be raised in profile. But so this report basically is saying we are where we are still. We're confident that some of those risks will always be there. They're high risks, they're never going to go away, but there's things that we're doing about them. But there are other things that are moving. But the key thing is to get the strategy right so that everyone knows how we are going to achieve the objectives that we want to achieve. So you should get the updated risk strategy and the refreshed risk register. It might be in a more pleasing format as well. I think always good to refresh these things in the March committee. So March will be quite a busy one for you, I'm afraid. But I think it's good time to take stock and get these things in place. So this is just a status report, really.
Thank you, Maura. Do members of the committee have any questions? Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick observation to say thank you for the risk register update. One thing that we're trying to do across committees is to ensure that we have a sort of identical presentation of risk registers across committees. And I know that the pension fund committee teams are trying to align on the audit. As per a suggestion, that was sort of the audit one is really good, and the heat map also was something that was really helpful, and to try and get that in the pension fund committee. So please, if you do make changes, could you also share that with the other officers, so that we have a sort of, I think it's helpful for members of the public to sort of see across the council a single sort of way of displaying risk. Yeah. Thank you, Maura.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holman.
It's actually not a disrelated issue. In point 2, you talk about in the report, furthermore, the work of the council's policy and accountability committees is acknowledged as a source of robust and additional assurance for management of risk across the services. Certainly, we've just talked about voter ID, which came to policy and overview. We've looked at opportunities and risk of AI, for example, things like that. And I know, the housing policy and accountability committee would look at obvious things like the health and safety risks with asbestos and fire safety, etc. And safeguarding in children and adults and things are obviously big risks, which I'm sure they regularly look at in those committees. But I think there is a little bit of, is there in this sort of refresh opportunities to identify where there may be gaps, which perhaps the policy and accountability committees could stiffen up a little bit? And are we happy again? I think to the further point that, risk in terms of how we assess it and present it in public forums across all of those forums are consistent. Yeah. So that's my point. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So I know that yeah, sorry. Jules has been talking to a lot of the services, so hopefully there is a consistency there. But I think that's a very, very good point. We do want to be seen to be consistent on this.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Holman. Just a comment from myself. Obviously, the matter of the size of the risk register has been something that's been raised by the external auditor for a number of years. My point has been and continues to be, obviously, we are a very large organisation with very complex needs and complex deliveries, as is the nature of local government. In terms of, and it's a question I've always asked the Chief Executive, is about the ownership of the risks, and we've been continuously assured that each risk is being assessed. Those responsible for the risks are indeed aware of such risks as well. So while the size of the risk, there may be a large number of risks on the register, I think it is worth commenting at least that these risks are constantly at the attention of officers. And I can see that Sharon has popped up on the screen. I can't tell if that's a hand up or not. So do you wish to speak, Sharon?
Thank you, Chair. I have to keep my camera off so that the camera can go on to the committee members. So I'm here at all times, but just making sure that you're the visible people in the room. risk management and mitigation is something we take very seriously at Hammersmith and Fulham. And you're quite right, we have been challenged about how we have included quite so many risks at times. I'm more comfortable, and we have taken that advice, and where it's been appropriate, have sort of consolidated the corporate risk register. But we always still have the departmental risk registers that feed into the corporate register. And I think it's really important that our senior officers are very alive to their risks and always have a strategy around mitigation. So we are always prepared to take advice of those people in the risk management industry. But equally, I think it's important for the council to identify and own the risks that are important to our residents, to our members, and to our organisation. So what I'm saying is I think organisations will have a flavour in terms of risks that reflects them. And I think it's important always to identify. And whether some of them make it to the corporate risk register or not, at a section and at a departmental level, people are alive to them. I think it's a very important process, Chair, and we're very active in that space.
Thank you, Sharon. That's really good to hear. Is there any final questions from members of the committee? In that case, I'm going to move along to the recommendation, and there is just the one recommendation. Do members agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Fabulous. Thank you, Maura. In that case, we shall move along to item 7, which is the corporate anti-fraud half-year report for April 1st to the 30th of September of this year. And can I ask Andy Hyatt to introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report covers the first 6 months of the financial year's counter-fraud activity. We try to give an overview of the activity that's been undertaken. At a request from the committee in this report, at 1.5, we've also highlighted the reasons where cases are closed. So we've given you an overview. On this occasion, there was a lot of NFI, National Fraud Initiative, data matches. They're the bulk, but hopefully it gives you an indication of how cases are closed and what the outcomes are. Most of the time we're reporting on the positives, so it's nice to see exactly how cases are dealt with in their entirety. The table at 1.6 gives an overview of our outputs for the first 6 months. Slightly lower than certainly on some areas, are slightly low for the first half, but that's not unusual. You've just come out of the summer, there's been summer holidays, and it's sort of now moving forward. One area that we are trying to focus on, really push forward again, as ever, is tenancy fraud. And further in the report, you will notice that there is a specific table that details all the properties we have recovered at 7.7. But unfortunately, at 7.8, the table straight away afterwards, it gives you an understanding of we've got lots of cases in the pipeline, but it's just about getting them through the courts and getting those properties heard and the properties back. Unfortunately, even with evictions at the moment, there are a lot of resource issues for bailiffs, and trying to get a bailiff to come and undertake the eviction in some instances is really hard. Now to his credit, our Director of Legal Services has been down, he's tried to speak to the courts, he's tried to look at alternatives. They are fully aware of our circumstances, that they are trying to come up with solutions, but we're doing our utmost to try and push it through where we can. And I think it will have a huge impact if we just got 50% of those cases through. It would surpass what we've done in previous years if we just got those. So it's something that's a little bit frustrating, but my officers are still pushing forward. They're still focusing on the goal, which is getting the properties back for the organisation. And that's pretty much an overview. We've not, at this moment in time, obviously, and again, it's something I think that's a positive move, is the reduction in the right to buys and changing the discounts that are available, because I think at a time when we're in desperate need of temporary accommodation and also in desperate need of affordable housing, we shouldn't really be selling it. And I think that obviously stopped. 21st of November was when the huge discounts of over 100k were reduced. Some local authorities had a massive influx of people putting applications in. We haven't had huge amounts, fortunately, ourselves. But again, what we have got is we've got a resource who is available, and we try to visit all the right to buy applications just to verify residency and also to do due diligence in terms of their finances to make sure that they do meet the criteria. But I think we've gone past that point. But that, if anything, is quite useful, because it just means that some of the work one of the officers was undertaking with right to buy verification can now be moved back to tenancy. So it gives us that flexibility to actually, as ever, target resources where it's needed. And in particular, one of the areas we do want to undertake is some proactive work on temporary accommodation. And that's something that we've got in the pipeline to look at. I haven't given too much information on here about the fraud hub, but that now is picking up. It's been a bit of a slow burn, but we've now actually got a dedicated resource that works across the three organisations of Hammersmith, Kensington and Westminster. He is now specifically putting data into the hub. And what we want to try and do is make sure that we target temporary accommodation data matching first and foremost, to see if we can get some quick wins, if there's some low-hanging fruit there where we can certainly try to recover some of those properties. And the cost of it is extortionate. So it's about getting those costs down if we can. So that's where we're aiming. We're also about to work with our Human Resources Department to look at using the Fraud Hub also as an additional entry-level sort of checklist, so that we can, any new employees get put through the Fraud Hub to make sure that this infamous issue of dual working doesn't pop up, and that they're only going to be working for our one organisation. So that's got a lot of potential going forward, and I'm hoping when we come to the end of year report, we can give you a much fuller picture of all the different types of activities the Fraud Hub has undertaken so far. Now we've got a dedicated resource that's really important, so that that person can focus primarily on getting data into the hub and hopefully identifying fraud and error. And that's where we're aiming to go with that. Hopefully that's an overview, but hoping to take any questions.
Thank you, Andy. I can see that that Sharon has her hand up. Sharon, do you wish to add anything else at this point?
Well, yes, please, if I might, Chair. The work of counter fraud is very, very important to the authority. We work closely with them. They're very professional and they're very effective. In the area of social housing fraud, this is an area that deeply disturbs us, not just because of the loss of income, but also the loss of homes for families in need. Temporary accommodation, as you know, is the country's suffering from that, and so are we. So it's so important to get these homes back. The monitoring officer did approach the court service about this, but I feel we'll probably have to now lobby with other local authorities about this problem, because the court services are not operating effectively. There is a backlog, and it means that homes are not coming back quickly enough. Counter fraud are doing their job, but we do need to repossess those homes because they are being used unlawfully, and the residents of the borough have the right to them, and we need to make that happen. And together, the new government being in place, I think this has got to be made a priority so that we can actually bring this work to fruition. Fraud and error is costing the country millions, but we have the wherewithal in Hammersmith and Fulham. We just need a little bit of help from the courts to enable families to get into those homes and cut down this backlog. So it's important work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Holman.
I was going to make some similar points on this, actually. a question on this. The tenancies that we've identified here, are these largely council tenancies or are some of them housing association tenancies as well? Because I believe that we've actually got more social housing within housing associations in the borough than we do within our own stock. So obviously that takes out the right to buy element, but it does take a massive hit on subletting and other fraud. So that's one question. And going back to the point that's just been made by our chief executive, do we have any idea of the sort of amounts of cases that other boroughs have got? Because I do think that there is a collective London, if not a collective national issue here for lobbying local councils to lobby the government about doing something in terms of this court situation, because it's not only about fraud, but it's also about the time it can take when you've got, you know, rent arrears or when you've got antisocial behaviour. It's a massive issue that our housing stock's not being allocated to perhaps the people that are most desperately in need of it. So I just wondered if we've got a sort of overview from what's going on in London in relation to this.
If I sort of take this in reverse order and deal with that issue first and foremost, I think across London we're seeing exactly the same. Certainly, I'm able to see firsthand Kensington and Westminster are both struggling in the same way. I have to say that probably figures here are slightly higher, but that's probably because we're more active at Hammersmith and Fulham. But yes, it's something that certainly I'm hearing. It's being echoed from other local authorities. I sit on the London Borough Fraud Investigators Group, and that might be an area where we could also try some lobbying and perhaps getting a London voice then. I've also in contact with LGA as well, so we can always have conversations with them. But yes, I totally agree. I think Sharon's right. It's something that it's a bigger issue for all councils. And it's ridiculous when these people have got tenancies fraudulently. Why are they still sitting there and sitting in them? They should really be put to the top of the list, shouldn't they, really, for us to be dealt with in court. So, yeah, I definitely think there's a good, strong case there. There may be a case, certainly for London, and lobbying, I totally agree. And I will actually try to take some forward with some of my network as well in pushing this. Moving back to the tenancies, I will need to double check which ones these are. Majority of these, I believe, are council on this occasion. End of year, you will see a number of RSOs were in there as well. The reason being, we have come to the view that we have memorandums of understanding with a number of the housing associations. And the basis is, whilst we automatically get a large percentage of properties that are allocated to us automatically, what we have offered them is the opportunity, if it's a good enough case and they haven't got an investigative resource, we will assist them on those cases, but only on the basis that if we get a recovery of that property, regardless of its size, we get exactly the same back as an additional nomination for the organisation. So, for example, if we got a Peabody property that was a 3-bedroom back, apart from the normal 70 to 80% of nominations the council gets, we want an additional one, that 3-bedroom unit. May not be in terms of a ground floor, as that might be what we found, but it will be size-wise will be exactly the same, so that it's a benefit to the organisation. So we do look at what we can, what resource we can offer them, and it has to be a case that is one that really we will add value to, and we're not sort of, it's just a case that they have a hunch. It has to be corroborative evidence, and it has to be of a reasonable size, because again, we need the bigger properties. As much as 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms are great, if we can get 3 or 4 bedroom properties back, they're the ones where people stay in temporary accommodation for ages. So that would be really important if we can.
Just coming back on that really quickly, what would be interesting to try and understand from the RSL point of view is how many we might be missing, because there obviously are only coming to you on particular cases, and it's the arrangement sounds really positive for Hammersmith and Fulham. So that sounds like a good thing, but I just wonder how many we're missing in that sector, because the housing associations just aren't picking it up and they don't have the resource to deal with it. So it could be even, you know, it could be hundreds and hundreds of properties across the country. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you know yourself, the size of some of the housing associations, they're so big and spread out as well across huge, vast areas that they don't have officers who can go out there and knock on doors and check residency. So I'm more than happy to explore that. We were looking to get a number of them together in one room just to discuss those sort of issues.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Andy, for introducing this report. Obviously, this is my obligatory token of appreciation to your work and that of your team. Things we don't often say is that your team more than pays for itself. The more we invest in you, the more you give back to us, which is quite rare in this world. I'm going to use the French expression that appelons un chat, let's call a cat a cat. The reason why you're having to lobby central government for more resources into the justice system is because, and I'll quote the Bar Council in May this year, we have a justice system at the point of structural failure. I want people to understand we're not lobbying the government to finally, you know, as if we were waiting since the election. The Bar Council itself reported a backlog of 67,573 cases, and the ambition then in May was only to reduce it to 53,000 by March 2025, an objective which the Bar Council judged unrealistic. So I just want the debate to account for why we are where we are and why our fraud strategies can't be implemented in full. Because if you're at home knowingly defrauding the council, but you know the bailiffs won't come, or you know that your hearing date would be in 5 years, then you're not prevented from doing that. The deterrent is lacking. So that's the weak link in the system. Some will know as well the data bill that has been put through in this government, in this parliament, as well as announcements over the weekend, really shows how the government's going to do more to tackle what I think is the key pillar of what you've talked about today, which is identity fraud. It's people pretending to be other people pretending to be where they're not. And it's quite remarkable that you've essentially put in place a shared fraud signals network with our neighbours. You're in the NFI, you're doing that through the Lottie as well. You have been doing things which are just becoming law now. So it really, really shows how much we've been doing, how visionary we've been in this council. So really, really well done. And please continue to share with us as much as you could. Now, I wanted to talk to you about one aspect of the fraud work that you do, and this isn't directly related to you, but I would hope that in how you implement this strategy, you will have an answer for me, or at least by the time of the next committee. It's to do with when you identify subletting. To set the context, subletting is a situation where someone rents a property, often council property, but actually rents it to a third person without our knowledge, illegally, often at a higher price. It has come to my attention recently with a resident of my ward that they were the person being sublet to, but they didn't know that this was illegal subletting. And as a result, they find themselves in a very precarious situation. So I wondered if you could tell us more about what do we do to support people who are the victims of that fraud, who genuinely had no part in it and no knowledge of it, but who possibly find themselves on the street because we repossess or, yeah, thank you.
I think there's two parts to it. I think the one part of it is their safety in the first instance. One of the areas that we do get subtenants who are concerned about giving information because they have fear of their own well-being, because if they speak out about their landlord, who they call their landlord, but obviously they're our tenants, they're frightened sometimes of physical violence. They're frightened that the individuals will come round and illegally evict them there and then. So we're fully aware of that, and we try to link them with the local safer neighbourhoods teams, etc. But what we also do is we try to reach out to our own housing department to say to them, look, we've got an individual here. These are the circumstances. We appreciate that they may not be eligible to go on the list, but what options are there available that we can try to direct them or point them in the right direction? And that, unfortunately, is about what we can do. It doesn't always mean that they are still willing to give support or willing to give us witness statements. But we do try our damnedest to try and get that across to them, that we're there to try and help them. But unfortunately, because of the circumstances, some individuals, and they're not silly, the person or the people they are subletting to are usually working people, because they don't want these individuals to claim housing benefit. So because of that, because they're working and they have an income, it means that sometimes they're not eligible or won't fit high up on our own waiting list. And it would be unfair to allow them to circumvent the process. So we do try to point them in that direction, but it's really hard because there's not a huge amount out there in terms of that side of the support for them. And it is something that's quite frustrating, really. But officers, they do, as I say, they effectively build good relationships with some of these individuals who are witnesses, and try to help them as best they can through the housing solutions. And the housing solutions aren't necessarily into temporary accommodation or waiting list. There are some areas where there may be market rents, so we can give support on a deposit, etc. So that's where we do try to suggest that might be a way through, but it is limited, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that's a potential. I know it's not to do with you, but this is something that I think I've identified is potentially an area of weakness in our operation. It's whereby someone is kicked out of their home that they're being sublet because, you know, you give examples of through letters or the threat of interview. Sometimes people just, you know, will give the keys back or go back into compliance. And I think that's the issue there. A person who would be sublet to wouldn't be considered to be homeless if they had people living in the area, but you could genuinely find yourself out of a home in a week's time. So I know that we won't find an answer tonight. You probably don't have the answer to that question, but I think we need to look into this. I have had an example of a person who's fallen through the cracks and from the day to the next find themselves on the street, and the housing department will look at that situation under, you know, in the circumstances that we all know of, which are very difficult circumstances amongst scarcity of housing. But I do wonder, however much of an anti-fraud enthusiast I am, sometimes whether if you're finding cases of someone being sublet, is it actually in our wider interest to let that continue up until that person is able to find somewhere else?
I've had a case like that, not in this local authority, at another local authority, where an agreement was made, but only for a very short period of time, for about 6 weeks. However, what I will take away from this, I will try to enter dialogue with our colleagues from housing and see what solutions we can put together, even if we're putting together at least a pack where the individual has options that they can turn to, so that we can present them with that and say, look, you're not on your own. These are the options that are available. So there's something clearly there for them from day one, because it may take a while. It'll take a while, as we already know, for us to get properties back sometimes, but it may take them a while to find somewhere. But if we start early on from the point of contact, giving them options, that might help us along.
Well, that's the thing. I think to identify the person that's being sublet to and get in touch with them, I appreciate it's going to be very touchy around sort of how do you tell them without tipping off the person doing fraud. But, you know, you could find yourself without a home from one day to the next, and it's sort of what do you do? And I have found that this is a fall through the crack situation. This person they don't qualify for support, etc., in the way that if their tenancy was being terminated by a private landlord and they couldn't find something on the private market, then, you know, we could help them, but they would get, for instance, the private renting team support. So yeah, I'd be thankful if you could look into that. And but I appreciate it's very bit of a cross-functional piece of work, and that's also something that can be raised with other colleagues.
But it benefits us as well, as you said at the start. You know, they're more likely to support us and to give us witness statements when we need it to really get that property back. So it's in both our interest and also in housing's interest, because it's another property back.
Thank you, Councillor. Do any other members have questions they wish to raise? Councillor Pascal-Tilbury.
Thank you very much. Just a brief one from me. Are there any trends that you're seeing or new developments that you're seeing either from Hammersmith and Fulham or more widely that we should be aware of, in particular around new types of fraud?
At the moment in time, we're not seeing a massive amounts of new types of fraud. I think the latest one that we have spotted are people trying to give false, as part of trying to create an image for themselves in terms of new applications. It's falsifying what used to be seen as traditional documentation for proof of residency, such as utility bills and documents such as that. Unfortunately, you can go online, you can Google it, it's not even dark web, it's in the top. Unfortunately, people can create fake utility bills very simply for people. And if you're building up an application, then that's there. It's something we've seen. However, what I've also seen, and I'm about to explore and speak to the manufacturers, there's also ways of reading all the documentation. So by character recognition, they will have a store of what fonts are being used, size of fonts, placements in the document. So we can use that sort of technology to try to prevent it. So although it's new, hopefully we're already finding ways to try and stop it. Apart from that, unfortunately, it's fairly traditional stuff outside of, I suppose, this environment. Running into Christmas, you're going to get a lot of doorstep fraud. You're going to get frauds, unfortunately, against our residents in terms of the cards being left for parcels and phone numbers that they dial a premium rate because they think they're phoning to rearrange a parcel delivery. General phishing, general emails in terms of savings as well. When I say savings, I mean savings on the purchase of items, and people, unfortunately, will click on those in terms of phishing emails. It's the time of year for that at the moment.
Is there any other questions? Councillor Hellman.
Sorry, this is totally different. It's about one of the examples you've got of the cases. It's example 4, which was the residence parking permit. I was just a bit curious about this because I could see why if somebody had a permit and they moved, they might not kind of come back and say, oh, well, I don't live there anymore. But I would have thought when the annual renewal of a parking permit comes up, there are quite a lot of checks in place to make sure that somebody doesn't renew it if they don't live there anymore. So I'm just a little bit curious about that. And which was the case in this, had they renewed it fraudulently, I think is the question, rather than the fact that they've just moved out and hadn't cancelled it.
It was the latter. They'd moved out and hadn't cancelled it. But it's something, and I totally agree.
I think a lot of people might actually do that, I'm afraid.
I think for us, it's about prevention and ensuring that we're not allowing permits to be held in 2 locations. It'd be very tempting if they were coming into London for the theatre, perhaps to then use it in Park, and it's loss of income to the organisation. So it's probably as much a tidying up and prevention exercise than it is fraud detection.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chivot-Vidier.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I wanted to ask you about, it's a very good question asking about trends. Deepfakes are the new danger whereby they're not necessarily someone's face, by the way, sort of being copy-pasted on someone else's body. They can be emails written in your tone of voice. They can be voice messages left on a voicemail. I'm interested in how do you actually give any training, whether you give any training to staff members internally. What do we do to keep our staff abreast of how the fraud landscape evolves?
So fraud awareness training is something that we provide on a regular basis. The types of fraud that you've mentioned there, these are ones we're just coming to learn and understand ourselves to try and identify how best to inform our staff to protect themselves. And at this moment in time, it's so new to us even that we're still struggling to see what best advice to give. I think it will be the old traditional advice, which is don't take anything on face value. Always make sure that you're looking at double checking the information that's provided, and preferably, as we always say, with an approved source. Don't just assume that because they've provided you with a telephone number on a letter that you phone that number to check who they are. You look up the company elsewhere and you make sure that that company exists and you use different number, their switchboard number rather than direct lines, etc. So I suppose at this moment in time, the way of protecting ourselves is, as we have done, don't accept the things on face value, make sure you're checking, use as many various different systems that we offer to make sure that you can verify who they are. And again, this goes back to the Fraud Hub. This is something that we're really trying to push now in terms of our comms, because all departments can access it and they can use it to do a basic check. It checks the data across all the other local authorities in the UK and also those in the hub, because that's more up to date, i.e. London. But if you're looking for Andy Hyatt and Andy Hyatt comes up in spelt form, well, you'll know, hold on, he's just told me he's just come into the country and he needs a property. So, you know, he's not. So it's just been trying to get people to use it. That's where we are now. And that's our big push. And it links into the part of the strategy, which is the understand, so that people understand what they can do as well as understand how fraud occurs. And that's our next real push, I think, over the next 6 months, is to try and get that pushed out.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any final questions from members? Okay, in that case, I'm going to move to the recommendation. There's one recommendation. Do members agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Fabulous. In that case, we move along to our final item for this evening, which is the date of the next meeting. Do members agree to note that the date of the next meeting shall be the 10th of March 2025?
Agreed.
Fantastic. In that case, I draw this meeting to a close. As this is obviously our next meeting is going to be next year. A very happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, whatever you're celebrating this year, and a very happy New Year to you all.